It is now my honor to welcome to the ALPFA stage your new CEO, our new CEO, Charles P. Garcia.
You don't want me to read from a script tonight, do you? Probably not. No more speeches. You know, I was looking at that video. First I thought I was running for office or something. But there was something in there that made me laugh because it reminded me of something that happened some years ago when the president of Panama, where I'm from, came to the United States, and Univision was running this commercial called Orgullo Hispano, and they had me in there, and they said, oh, you know, this Panamanian business person. So the president said, you know, let's get him to come to Panama, and let's give him the key to the city. So it was real cool. You know, I went with my family down there, and with my kids, my wife, and my dad had already passed, but my mom went with me. And when we got to the presidency, you know, we cleared security. And when we got to the president's office, we knew the president was on a very tight schedule. And there was 3 ladies of different ages in the office. And when they saw my mother, it was like Shakira had walked in. They went crazy, started screaming. My mother was a science teacher in 7th grade for 22 years. And these 3 ladies had had my mother as a science teacher. So they immediately went into the president's office and started telling the president how my mother had literally changed their lives. And, you know, I'm listening to this whole thing, and you gotta realize this is the first time in my life I had, you know, reached, you know, a level of financial success. I'm being written about in magazines, and, you know, I'd be lucky if my ego at that time even, you know, fit in this room. And like clockwork, 20 minutes goes by, you know, knock, knock, the doors open, and all the photographers come in. So the president gets up and says, well, you know, where's the award for the teacher? And my mother is in all the newspapers the next day with the key to the city. And, you know, obviously I'm very proud of my mother, but, you know, my time in the sun had come and gone. And I was like, you know, Mom, you know, what does this all mean? And she looks at me and says, mijo, este es para que nunca te olvides que tu vida nunca se va a medir por todas las posesiones materiales que acumulas. Tu vida siempre se va a medir por cuántos corazones tocas. So what my mom had said was, she said, look, your life will never be measured by all the material possessions you accumulate. Your life will always be measured by how many hearts you touch. And isn't that what we do every single day at ALPFA? So the one question that I get all the time, I'm having dinner last night with our friends from Deloitte. You know, the dinner goes, and you know, I always get that question. So, let me ask you a question. Can you explain to me why are you doing this? Why? So, it's very simple. I got called from a gal named Susan Medina from Chicago, and she said, hey, look, and I know Susan, said you were involved in the turnaround of Nishimba. You were on the board for a couple of years, and you helped recruit Manny Gonzalez, the current CEO, and you went through that process. And I was wondering if perhaps you knew someone, you know, ALPFA's going through a transition, and Manny's retiring, Manny Espinosa. So I said, yeah, and I gave her some names, and about, you know, 48 hours later, I sent her 8 people who I thought would be a good CEO of ALPFA, and why I thought that. And about a week went by, and I told my wife, Christina, I said, hey, remember Manny and Lupita? Manny's retiring. I gave them some names on who I thought would be a good CEO. And my wife said, well, who did you give them? And I told them. And she looked up and she said, well, why don't you do it? Like, me? And she said, well, isn't Alpha about networking? Yes. Aren't you like, LinkedIn has 300 million people and you're in the top 50 most connected people on LinkedIn? Yes. Isn't Alpha about leadership development? I said, yes. Haven't you written 2 best-selling books on leadership development? Yes. And aren't you always the one complaining about weak Latino organizations and blah, blah, blah? Yes. She's really good in sales. I was like, yes, yes, yes. So I spent a few weeks in a little self-reflection, and I thought, a few years back I went to Harvard Business School and I took a course called Authentic Leadership Development, and I really figured out what my life calling is about. And I looked at my life calling of teaching, motivating, and working with people to inspire them for a bold vision for their future and to achieve extraordinary things. And I looked at Alpha and I said, this really fits me like a glove. So I called Susan back and I said, hey, Susan, I'm interested in applying. And I went through the process, and I knew someone that was very engaged with Alpha, so I called Joe Mella. Joe, stand up. I know you're around here. So I talked to Joe for about an hour, and Joe said, I've been involved for almost 10 years in Alpha on the corporate advisory board. I've never missed a meeting, and he talked to me about it for about an hour. And he said, if I was in a position, I would consider doing it. And that meant a lot to me, but he said, but before you make up your mind, I want you to call someone who can really give you the history of Alpha, which I did. And I'd like Gil Vasquez to stand up. Gil? In 1972, Gil Vasquez founded Alpha. And for an organization to be around this long and the founder to still be here is incredible. And not only did Gil speak with me, but I've had an opportunity, in the last month to spend some time in LA. And when you walk in a room with Gil, it's like the ocean parts. He's still the CEO of the LA Chamber of Commerce. My partner, Sol Trujillo, in a business I've had for 4 years. Sol has run 350 billion market cap companies in 3 continents. Couldn't stop speaking to me so well about Gil, and I admire him, and I look forward to working with Gil. So I met with Yvonne, who I think could easily be running one of our Fortune 1000 companies one day. She's that good. I talked to the board, I talked to the corporate advisory board, and especially talked to chapter presidents and leaders all around the country, and I really knew this felt to me, very, very authentic. And that is really why I'm here. And I've told the board, and I tell leaders all the time that I've met, don't judge me by my words. Judge me by my actions. So I've been here just about 60 days. I've traveled all around the country. In New York, for those of you that have been to our New York office, we have an office about a quarter block from the New York Stock Exchange. It's really nice. The CEO's office takes up about 20-25% of the space. It's really nice. So what I decided to do, because I believe organizations like Alpha, who have been around a lot of time, have too much concentration on the leader and too much concentration on the national headquarters. The first thing we're going to do at Alpha, as of right now, we will never talk about Alpha National. What is that? When you say Alpha National, you're already creating a we and a them. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. No more Alpha National. There is only one Alpha. When I came to the convention, out of respect, The first group of individuals that I met with weren't the corporate sponsors, it wasn't the board, it wasn't the corporate advisory board, it was the chapter presidents. We had a 4-hour meeting, one-on-one. It was the university chapter presidents, and it was the chapter presidents as well. And we level set it, and we talked, and I heard a lot of feedback. So what I'm doing with the office in New York is we're creating something I'm calling the President's Lounge. And if you were a president, retired, a member of the board, the CAB, or a current president, we're going to have an amazing place for you to come visit. Mi casa is su casa. So just wait till you come visit us. It's going to be a beautiful lounge. We've already designed it. Thank you to Will Ravalino and others. We're going to have a couple of computer stations, printers. We have a nice ice box with a lot of nice things for you guys, a TV room, a coffee place. So then you must be wondering, well, where are you going to sit? Because I go to New York quite often. So what I did is I found the smallest cubicle right next to the interns, and that's my office. And that's my office to remind me that ALPFA is not about Charlie Garcia. ALPFA is about the chapter presidents who are the lifeblood of this organization. So I brought an oil painting with me, and I put it up. And I have a couple interns, Stefan and Lena. You may have seen them in the talent show yesterday. They were dancing. I voted for them, by the way. And Jonathan Cifuentes sits, one of the technology gurus in our office, sits next to me. And I bug him all the time because, I need a lot of help. So they asked me, why are you putting this pic, and who is this guy? And I said, he's a janitor I once knew. A janitor? Why are you putting the picture of a janitor in your office? So I'm going to tell you the story I told them. When I went to the U.S. Air Force Academy, the first year is called your Dooley year, which is, Dooley means slave in Greek. They treat you really poorly. And I'm not, very proud to say there was this one janitor that worked in our squadron, and we would, tip over his pail of water. We would, take his broom and hide it and whatever. We treated him pretty disrespectfully. And one of my classmates, Luis Bustamante, who's from Colombia, was doing a story for one of his military classes on Medal of Honor winners. And he's reading this story about this private in the Army that in 1943 in Aviano, Italy, was in an engagement with a company, and they were pinned down by 3 German pillboxes. And about half an hour away was a Panzer company that if they would have come, they would have wiped them out. So they needed someone to go on a suicide mission, and William Crawford, a private from Colorado, decided to go on that mission. And he crawls about 75 yards, he gets wounded twice, and one by one, he launches 3 satchel charges, taking out each of the pillboxes. Right when the German counterattack came, and it allowed the soldiers to retreat and save themselves. So they thought that he had passed away, and they put him in for the Medal of Honor, and they sent that Medal of Honor to his parents because he had died. But William Crawford didn't die. The Germans found him. He was wounded. They took him back to Berlin, and he spent the next 2.5 years of World War II in this POW camp in Berlin. And when the war was over, they found him all scrawny and, dilapidated, but he stayed in the Army, and he ended up retiring as a, command sergeant major. And he decided when he went back to Colorado, he didn't want to retire. He wanted to work around young men and women. So guess what? Luis Bustamante comes back to the squadron, goes up to William Crawford and says, Mr. Crawford, were you in the Army? Yes, son. Did you see action in World War II? Yes, son. Were you by chance in Aviano, Italy? Yes, son. Are you a Medal of Honor winner? Yes, son, I am. Man, all of a sudden, everything changed. Like, there's a Medal of Honor winner in our squadron, and everybody's like, Mr. Crawford, can I sweep the floor for you? You need some water in your pail? And I honestly would not be here today had it not been for all the lessons of leadership, humility that I learned from this man. And that's why I have his picture in my office to remind me that the most important trait in leadership is humility, confident humility. William Crawford is the only Army individual to be buried on the grounds of the United States Air Force Academy. And since he had never gotten the Medal of Honor like you usually do at the White House, when I graduated, we were able to do a ceremony. President Reagan came out for our graduation address, and they were able to give him the Medal of Honor, which was a really special ceremony. I hire people that are humble and confident. I've been here less than 30 days, and I want to tell you, one of the things that the chapter presidents told me is technology at ALPFA is a nightmare. You got to fix this. And I heard an earful. So my first hire was Julio Carbonell. Julio Carbonell, and I'm going to ask my executive team to stand in a moment. Julio was the CIO of Major League Baseball. After Major League Baseball, he went to the ASPCA, an organization with chapters all around the country, as their first CIO. He was my first hire. The second big issue I got complaints on is brand. Our brand not only is all over the place, but no one's even heard of ALPFA. Half of the members of my team didn't know what ALPFA was. So my second hire was Lori Ruff. Lori Ruff is our Chief Branding Officer. Just yesterday, CEO World Magazine named her #7 woman in the world in branding and social media influence. She's been ranked 2 years in a row by Forbes magazine as one of the top 50 brand influencers, 19 on the list. Then there's Jorge Ortega, our Chief Marketing Officer. I've known Jorge for a very long time. He's been at Burson Marsteller, the largest communications firm in the world. He was in New York, Chicago, 5 years opening their office in Mexico. He's represented companies like Coca-Cola, ESPN, McDonald's. He's on the team. Lenny Delgado, my Chief of Staff and Deputy General Counsel, graduated #1 in her class from the University of Florida, summa cum laude, went to Harvard Law School, magna cum laude, wrote a paper about why there isn't enough lawyers in the Latino legal profession, worked 2 years in the largest law firms in New York. She wrote a best-selling book and has been on all kinds of media shows. She's on our team. Manny Rubio, her boss, the general counsel, Columbia undergrad, Columbia Law, only lawyer I know that has a CFA. He's taken 2 companies public, blah, blah, blah. The guy is amazing. And then joined us 3 days ago, Frank Lopez. I met Frank 10 years ago. He was the president and CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. When he got there, they were doing about $200,000 a year. When he left, they were doing over $2 million. A great leader. And lastly, Carlos de Quesada. Carlos de Quesada is our new CFO. I met him when I was representing Liberty Power, one of the largest Latino-owned businesses. There were about 100 million back then. And Carlos took them through a lot of growth. They're about $1 billion today. I've been in the foxhole with Carlos, who's a U.S. Marine. His wife is a Marine too, and I'm glad to have him. But the most importantly is that this team is I wouldn't even call them an executive team, because if you take the highest salary of our non-executive, they're earning about 50 to 60% of that. So they're here because of me and because of the ALPFA mission. And I'd like our executive team to stand up. Thank you very much for joining us. I would call this team the A-Team, but being a military guy, I would call them SEAL Team 6, maybe even the Delta Force. And believe it, we need them. So our team sat down with some of our corporate partners, and we had a conversation. And some of our corporate partners were very enthusiastic, and honestly, someone weren't. One of the attributes of a good leader is they make people uncomfortable. I like to say we're the sand in the oyster. That's how a pearl comes out. We make people uncomfortable. We have about 400 corporate partners, and I sat down with those that we could meet, and I reminded them that ALPFA is a member organization. We exist to provide value to our members, which is driven through the leadership of our chapter presidents. So that's where we started. And I asked for two things. One, I wanted to know, first of all, what the relationship was like, what we did well, and where there were some opportunities where we can do better. And we had a really good conversation. And I said, look, I am a CEO. I am the CEO of ALPFA. So if we're going to have a long-term relationship, first of all, I need to meet and know your CEO. Because if we have a personal relationship and we can communicate, that's important. The second thing is that my leadership team needs to meet with your leadership team for a half day to a day planning session. We need to roll up our sleeves, and I'm all about results. I'm about results, I'm about KPIs. Let's figure out how I can help you and how you can help us, and let's drive for results. But like anything else, it's the 80-20 rule. Do I want to have 400 companies that we provide a mediocre job to and a mediocre relationship? Or do I want to have 20% of those companies where we go deep and we really provide value? Some companies are uncomfortable with this, others aren't. I'm happy to say about an hour ago, I'm sitting at my table and I got an email. And it was an email directly from a CEO of one of the 100 most powerful companies in America. And it was a very pleasant and courteous email introducing me to the special assistant to set up a meeting. When you demand respect, you get respect. I've only been around 60 days. Many of you have already forgotten what I know currently. But what I do know is we're going to focus on 4 things initially. Our 4 strategic priorities are technology, growth, new partnerships, and strengthening our Latino community. Technology. You know, I could talk to you for an hour of everything that we need to do on the technology front. We need a lot of help. We need CRM, we need all kinds of event planning, all kinds of things, and it's coming. Growth. This organization will reach, within the next 3 years or sooner, 100,000 members. New partnerships. Our first new partnership that we're going to launch in October is something I call the ALPFA Latino Business 500. I call this Project Phoenix. One day, there's going to be 500 Latino-owned businesses like Liberty Power, which is almost $1 billion, and Goya and everybody else, that are going to be corporate partners of ALPFA. They're going to have members in ALPFA. We're going to be giving them talent. We're going to be giving them folks for their advisory boards. They need a lot of help on the finance side. And they're going to be really valuable partners. And in terms of strengthening the Latino community, we're going to focus on financial literacy, and we're going to develop a culture of philanthropy that does not yet exist in our community. And if ALPFA can be the catalyst, and I want to call this, there's the United Way, 20 years, people are going to be thinking of the ALPFA way. Yes, indeed. More to come on that. But before I end, speaking of uncomfortable, I want to tell you about how I made one president uncomfortable one day. I don't know how many of you remember about in 2002, 2004, the University of Michigan had a case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court on affirmative action. How many of you remember that? Okay? The University of Michigan had a policy where they would let in Latinos and other minorities because they felt that that ethnicity, they needed more of those minorities to have a diverse culture. They were challenged on that, and the whole concept of affirmative action was challenged, and it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. I was working for Governor Bush on the State Board of Education of Florida. There were 7 members. I was the only Latino, and I was working for his brother, President Bush, on a national initiative, the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans. And both the president and his brother, the governor, had submitted a brief to the United States Supreme Court called an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, against the University of Michigan. And I didn't agree with that because I agreed with the University of Michigan, so I didn't know what to do. I opened the Wall Street Journal one day and I read a story that there was a group of Fortune 500 CEOs that were writing an amicus brief to the United States Supreme Court supporting the University of Michigan. So I said, wow, that's something I can support. So I picked up the phone, I figured out who the law firm working on it in DC was, and I called them. And I said, hey, this is Charlie Garcia. I have a company, it's the fastest growing Hispanic-owned business in the US, according to Inc. magazine, blah, 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 and I'd like to sign your brief. Pause. With all due respect, Mr. Garcia, the companies that are signing this brief, they make billions of dollars in profits a quarter. I said, well, that may be the case, but which one of your CEOs works for the President of the United States and the Governor of Florida as, you know, on the State Board of Education? Let me get back to you. So the next day, I get a call. I said, Mr. Garcia, I'm pleased to inform you, we'd love for you to sign our brief. In fact, we want you to be the poster child of our brief. So I worked on it. By the time we finished, there was about 58 Fortune 500 companies that signed the brief. My company was the only non-Fortune 500 company, and it was going to be filed on a Monday, so I had to let the governor know before, you know, he read about it in the paper. Luckily for me, he was on an Enterprise Florida trip to Madrid. So I sent him an email. Unfortunately for me, Governor Jeb Bush is a little bit of a geek in that regard. He checks his email, and he had a BlackBerry back then, so my wife calls me around 5 o'clock on a Sunday and said, Governor Bush is on the phone, and I don't know, he seemed a little off. So I got on the phone and we had words, and at the end I said, look, you know, you'll have my resignation on your desk in the morning because I just can't agree with you. After explaining him my rationale, he says, no, I don't want to create a martyr of you. So the next day, I get a call from the lieutenant governor, and I told him why I was doing it. I stayed on, and then we had a report due to the President of the United States on, you know, on Latino issues, and I told my fellow board members that we had to write something about this issue. We had to take a stand. So on a Friday, I became an agenda item in the White House on an agenda of a guy named Karl Rove, Chief of Staff of the White House. You don't want to be on this man's bad side. So I start getting calls, frantic calls from all my Latino Republican friends in Washington. They're like, you know, and Colin Powell a week before had written, you know, a press release saying that he supported affirmative action and he didn't support the president on this issue. So he said, Charlie, who do you think you are, man? Colin Powell, cállate la boca, man, no digas nada. You know, the Bush brothers, they're all about loyalty. And I went ahead and we did what we did, and luckily Sandra Day O'Connor came out in a 5-4 decision backing the University of Michigan at that time. So I had to go to Crawford, Texas, where the president lived, to his ranch. I had been previously invited. So I showed up and I didn't know, you know, what am I going to tell the president? So I went up to President Bush and I shook his hand and I said, Mr. President, in light of the University of Michigan decision, I just want you to remember what Ronald Reagan once said. I said, what's that? I said, Ronald Reagan once said that if someone is your friend 80% of the time, they're your friend and not your enemy. So I started to walk away and I feel this hand on me and he puts his like thumb into me and turns me around. I remember thinking, you know, God, he's pretty strong for an old guy. You know, things that go through your head. And he reached out and he said, Charlie, I want to thank you for serving in my administration and standing up for what you believe in. And about a week later, I get a call from the White House, and like, oh, Mr. Garcia, you know, the president has decided to change this policy that's going to affect Latino education, and we want to know what you thought. I'm like, I've been here for 5 years. The White House has never called me before. And what I learned from that experience are 3 things. We are all leaders. You're a parent, you're a leader in your house, you're a leader in your job, you're a leader in the community, you're a leader at ALPFA. If you're a leader, you can't wait 25 years to start being a leader. You have to be a leader every single day. The second thing I learned is that leadership is a virtue, but it's only a virtue if it's principled. And the most important thing I learned from this little experience, we're all in positions of leadership. Some of us are in really big positions of leadership right now. And if you're not willing to walk away from leadership, you have no power. And the minute that people know that you're the kind of leader that will walk away from the power that you have, that is when you become a statesperson. That's when people start looking at you differently. So, in summary, I am a change agent, and I have a habit of making people feel uncomfortable. And there's a good chance that sometime in our personal relationship, I may make you feel uncomfortable. One of the things that greatly disturbs me is that there's 872 Fortune 1000 companies that haven't found a Latino good enough to sit on their board of directors. 75% of Fortune 500 companies do not have a Latino in the C-suite. That is unacceptable. And ALPFA and I will be ferocious to change that. Because in America, in our country, power is never given. Power is taken. And it's our time. It's ALPFA's time. And we are going to start right now. And one last thing before I leave. If our mission is to empower and develop Latino men and women into leaders of character for our nation, in every sector of the American and global economy, then it's my personal opinion that ALPFA should stand for the Association of Latino Professionals for America. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.